This is Emmett, the Malibu Poet, with a new Western series dealing with a subject dear to the hearts of die-hard Old West enthusiasts. Here on this CD disc are tales and stories, some in poem form, about a time when the West was a difficult and dangerous place in which to live. The strong, tough, and determined helped build a continental nation through their stubbornness and vision. Yes, perhaps unbeknown to them, they had a vision of the future when the law of the gun would not be as important as it was during their time. And so, here within are tales of the gunfighters, the lawmen, outlaws, ranchers, and other builders of the Old West. A time that will not return, but it should not be forgotten either. For within these tales we can recognize the courage and resourcefulness of those who displayed their honor even in their choices of calling. Compared to the time frame of today, the actions of those in the Western yesterdays were mostly of necessity and purpose. Granted, they may seem harsh and rough to us, but tough actions were needed for those times. So let us step back into the past that is only as close as these words and memories reveal in the West of yesterday. Here's a story of a man riding hard to escape a fate he had not planned or expected. He is alone, remembering what transpired hours before, and at the same time aware that his chance of survival is very slim. Let us proceed to this poem story called Pardners. Shadows were moving across the hills, and the sun was going down. It had been a long and tiring day for all that had gone down. This morning seemed so far away from all that had transpired, and though saddle-sore and weary, he rode on, beyond just tired. But he couldn't help remembering his pard that he left behind, that stood beside him, shooting when jumped by the lawless kind. They were outnumbered 2-1 the moment it began, and only he was standing when it all came to an end. And now the posse was on his trail and closing very fast. He wondered if his big old roan could keep going to the last. The townsfolk didn't like his kind that was only passing through, and he and his old pardner didn't take insults, so they drew. And that's how it all started, but how was it to end? Swinging from a tree limb or a shootout to defend? If he could make it to the hills before the setting sun, chances are he could escape and rest from this hard run. Again he thought of his pardner and the places they had seen, how the years had passed so quickly, all across those different scenes. The time they survived at Shiloh and Gettysburg as well, it all seemed like a yesterday, when together they faced hell. The darkness was closing in, and the big roan was slowing down, but he was almost in the clear when a bullet kicked the dust ahead and struck upon the ground. Then he heard the rifle shot, with the next one come as close, and then he passed around a rock to escape the posse host. He made it, else this story could never have been told. He traveled on to other towns, and he lived to be quite old. But he never forgot his pardner and the days upon the trail, the sharing of adventures, and the loyalty that prevailed. Yes, friendship runs deep to those who share in life's adventures and dangers. It is basically the same today, but in the Old West, it was even more so. It is not unusual to find considerable interest in the gunfighters and hired guns of the early West. It was so in those days, and strangely much the same today. We sometimes wonder what they were thinking to choose a lifestyle as dangerous and as unprofitable as being a gunfighter. It didn't pay too well, nor did it provide a long life, and death was most always by someone with a faster or lucky draw, and no one remembered them after they were planted in Boot Hill. No one loved them. It was mostly fear that brought respect, and yet the gunfighters always seemed to be available or around, needed or not. This poem story is one of my favorites because here we dig down into the personality and thinking of a gunfighter facing the last gunfight of his career. He is outnumbered, but cannot back down because of honor and his own self-respect. Let us move on now to Death of a Gunfighter. It was no fun to face them off in that lonely cattle town, the 3 hired guns from Appleton's that had sworn to put him down. The reason wasn't important, for it only takes a glance to get one's ire as hate transpires to lead to a shooter's stance. He tried to calm their anger at the beginning of the thing, but it only made matters worse, as he feared what it would bring. So now he's standing in the street in a lonely cattle town, and he wonders if he's fast enough to put them on the ground. He feels the looseness of his gun in the holster that is worn. He's had it close to 8 years now, and it's getting slightly torn. Again he tries to soothe their minds to end it before it starts, but they outnumbered him 3-1 and had cold and calloused hearts. His mind flashed back to days of youth when life was better then. It didn't have the dangers that would bring this type of end. He smiled so ever slightly and stood up straight and tall, and at least he'd go out fighting, though no one cared at all. The 3 quickly stepped aside to hide the chance they had. He knew that would cost him dearly, and it made him somewhat sad. He thought that the first one on the left, who was slim and younger too, to be the one who might draw first, and he judged the draw they'd do. Suddenly the move was made by that slim one on the left. He drove a .45 at him before he hit the rest. 2 went down upon the ground, but the third one on his right had opened up with a double barrel, and the blast had closed his sight. His world spun round as he fell to the ground, to never rise again. His life as a lonely gunfighter had come to a bitter end. And he, too, wound up in Boot Hill, forgotten like the others. As many of us know, our training in life can help us to become successful or discouraged. It was no different in the Old West, and many a married man found out that his charming wife was very determined and capable. Here is a humorous story about a man who benefited greatly from the training he received from his sweet and decisive better half. His name is Casper Milkweed. Yes, and he lived up to his name. He had no reputation and very little fame. His wife made the decisions and told him what to do, and it saved him making choices like the other ranchers do. She made it mighty easy to go along with things. His life was without conflicts and the problems that could bring. But he couldn't visit Slick's saloon or play a hand of cards, and so that saved him money, plus hangovers with his pards. He didn't wear a .45 like some would pack around, and, it's because his wife supported gun control and wanted none around. Their steers were often rustled because the outlaws had no fear of being shot or on the spot when Casper's wife was near. All in all, he was a wimp that had an easy life. He hardly ever made mistakes, for the choices were his wife's. He sort of stayed just out of sight and did what he was told, perhaps visit the lower pasture land and rest and take repose. And then one day a vision came. While resting beneath a tree, he envisioned what he could become and what he ought to be. For he had the preparation and knew how to compromise. He didn't make decisions, or seldom acted wise. Yes, he would become a politician, and with his attributes become a senator or mayor, and play that he's astute. And so he finally made a choice and went and told his wife that he was leaving her the ranch and getting a new life. And thank you for the training that she so aptly gave, but for now he was city-bound with a mission that would pay. Yes, he became a politician and the mayor of that town, and later on a congressman, the best that money found. He did exactly as was told, as given by his staff, and played it wise to compromise, as he learned back in the past. He went on to fame and glory and even made a name, all because of training as a husband of no fame. And you see, there are positive aspects to being an expert at compromising and learning to obey. And so we leave friend Casper Milkweed and journey on to an ancient legend and a band of outlaws. Surprisingly, there are a lot of old and ancient legends which are still being passed around concerning hidden treasure in the Old West. Once a prospector that I knew gave me this story, and it's worth passing along. I had to ply him with a bit of effervescent liquid, but what he told me provided this tale in poem form, and this is what he said about the legend of Apache gold. There's a legend from down Sonora way about Apache gold that I was once involved in before I got this old. It tells of ancient treasures, gold and silver hoards, doubloons and Spanish emeralds, and even rusty swords. The Apaches found it before we came to claim the land as ours. It was hidden back in a canyon that time and wind had scoured. It was in the spring of '62 when a band of outlaws found a hidden trail to a canyon cave that was Apache holy ground. And there inside, where they could hide, they found the ancient treasure, far more than they could carry out or even begin to measure. The gold was stacked in piles and sacks, in dust and nuggets too, and rotting chests of silver plate stunned this outlaw crew. And so with greed and thoughtless lust they grabbed what they could take, loaded up their horses with plans for an escape. But greed had dulled their reasoning, and they argued who might tell. And then it broke into a fight, where 4 outlaws, wounded, fell. And I alone lived to escape, and now the years have passed to tell this legend of the gold before my time is past. And that's what the old prospector told me. And as long as I knew him, he never seemed to be broke or out of cash. And I still sort of wonder, was it just a tale or legend, or was it really true? And now we come to a short story that is written in the form of prose. It is one of my favorites because we enter into the thinking and memories of an individual who experienced a lot in life. His lifestyle was basically one of caution, and yet he lived a full and adventurous life, apparently doing what he wanted to do and making choices for survival. Let us go to the story about this strange man of the West, which is named Mystery of John Dooley. This is a short story about an old-timer named John Dooley, and the last I heard, he was still living up on Rim Rock. It's a hard place to get to, isolated and with a view of the valley below. His cabin was built on a rocky ledge that put him in command of anyone coming his way. We often wondered about old John. His life seemed to be a mystery to most of us. That is, until we didn't see any smoke from his cabin for quite a few days. We figured he had passed over to the big range or was down sick with something. So I was chosen to ride up to Rim Rock, giving some notice upon my arrival, so he wouldn't waste a warning shot like he was accustomed to doing. After a long and tiresome ride to old John's cabin, I found him all weakened from some strange illness that put him down without much strength to do much. I spent a week with John Dooley, having brought along some grub and basic medicines, figuring as how he might be sick and laying low. Out here in the territory, we all have to be prepared for most anything that comes our way, and who can say that life is easy? Tribulations come to all of us, and no need to fuss over it. Well, with John Dooley's stubbornness to survive, he recovered slowly from his ailment, which I believe was caused by some kind of a bug or insect bite. That's about the only thing to put that old-timer down, something you couldn't see, because he was always on the alert for the unexpected, as all of us should be. During the week when I was helping him to recover, he gave me the story behind the mystery that we all had put around him. And though people thought him old, he really wasn't, at least in his mind and thoughts, that is. And so, before I had to leave and head down to the valley, here is what he told me, a story which had shaped his life and the lives of others. When John Dooley was young, he was courting a right pretty gal from the Clanton family. They were both soft on each other and had planned to marry. But as he noticed the closeness of the family ties and the fact that she didn't want to leave her surroundings or move further west for adventures and the future, he did some close pondering and he decided it would be best to leave and cut out on his own. Mind you, he was young and adventurous and somewhat of a drifter at heart. The idea of sticking to one area and close family ties seemed sort of suffocating to his ranging spirit. Well, to prevent a scene and more heartache, he left his sweet and heartbroken wife-to-be and lit out for the western horizon. His life and challenges lay ahead of him, and having some drifter's blood in his veins, he didn't much look back. But it wasn't the same with the Clanton family. They took this failure to keep one's word and marry their daughter as a serious affront. And there the Clanton and Dooley feud started. This sweet gal's brothers and cousins swore vengeance, and John Dooley was the target. Somehow he got wind of their attempts to find him, and in those days threats were not taken lightly. He started packing a .45 and practiced techniques needed for his survival. He became a fast gun. Always alert and mostly on the move, he took odd jobs here and there for short intervals. He became a hired gun for a big outfit in Montana, a sheriff for a while in a mining town. As his reputation grew, word of him got out, making it easier for the Clanton gang to find him. It was at Silver Creek where the brother of his wife-to-be faced him off in a darkened saloon. In moments, the revengeful Clanton lay dead upon the floor. But there were more of them willing to die, to pay back Dooley for his supposed treachery, and now this killing of a Clanton. It was no fun on the move, always on the alert, looking over his shoulder for an enemy seeking to dry gulch him. So John Dooley went further into the hills, became a prospector, and carried a hidden gun. He no longer advertised his ability and fast draw. Instead, he became reclusive and what some would say a loner. Surprisingly, even to him, John found what he was looking for, a productive gold vein that later made him rich. He was able to take out a considerable sum of gold, sold the mine, and moved further west, yet always looking over his shoulder for the avengers. It had become an obsession with the Clintons, and the more the search for Dooley seemed fruitless, the more determined they became. He was careful not to give out his name now. Rumors had ways of getting around in the Old West, and there wasn't much entertainment to divert one's thinking other than gossip or rumors. John Dooley was getting older, too, a bit more tired. From all his days of work and discomfort, he had a fair amount of money, and he could go to Frisco and live in ease. But he loved the mountains and nature, the wild animals, and the wilderness places that touched his soul and spirit. So he kept on the move, quiet in his speech, making few friends, but living with appreciation for what he had and what he had seen. But he always maintained his fast draw and alertness for whatever might come his way. Finally, he bought a large stretch of land up on Rim Rock, built a cabin with a view of the valley below, where he could view the approaches to his land, and there, with books and memories, he would stay. When needed, he came into town for supplies, was never stingy with his money, and helped the local charities. But he always wore a gun, mostly hidden, for by now the Clantons had probably died off or given up. Yet the old habits lingered, and the alertness for danger never left Tom Dooley. You know, some of the locals call him Old John Dooley, but he's not old in my eyes. He is still the alert and adventurous man of the West, quite typical of the type you would expect to find in a land where honor, determination, and individualism still lives. And this is the story of Tom Dooley, and even now I can still picture him and recall his words of wisdom. Of all of the characters of the Old West, the bounty hunter was no doubt an enigma. He was either one of the bravest or the hardest of the lot, most likely a combination of both. They generally worked alone and searched out and tracked down the hardest of the outlaws that had a bounty on their heads. It was a dangerous calling, and they were after dangerous men who had nothing to lose. And here is a poem story about the hunter who was faced with a deadly challenge, how it came about, and what happened, called Deadly Strategy. He rode into this dusty town like other towns before, but this time it was different, more deadly than before. This time it was two men he had to find and catch, one outlaw named Will Horton and the other Vincent Pritch. Both of them were wanted with high prices on their heads, and they weren't about to give up, even if stone dead. The bounty hunter knew before he rode out on their trails that this would be the toughest yet, and he didn't dare to fail. He rode to the local stable and bedded down his horse, his only trusted companion that he would admit, of course. His guns were always in good shape, as the tools he often used, and he didn't overlook one thing when others were confused. 10 long years he plied his trade and made a tidy sum. Sometimes wounded, tired and worn, it was far from being fun. And then the men that he brought in were sometimes those he knew, from the war years to cattle towns, and others not a few. He boarded up at a local place and then looked around, searching precise and careful-like to see what could be found. These bad dudes were not some rubes to give up without a fight, so he had to catch them unawares, with the odds for him just right. 2 days later, at sundown, with the sun square in their eyes, the outlaws left Jim Smart's cafe and were caught quite by surprise. The bounty hunter, in the shadows, ordered them to freeze. They did exactly the opposite, lightning fast with ease. The roar of 45s were heard to break that ending day, and the flash of action of the moves were as fast as the gunplay. 3 professionals, 2 to 1, but the timing was just right. The setting sun in the outlaw's eyes ended there the fight. It's told the reward was paid in full, and the hunter then moved on, looking for more wanted men before they all are gone. But I must tell you, the bounty hunter finally came up against something he couldn't cope with. And so let us see what it was and how it affected him and the tough hombre he was tracking who made the first move. This one is named Mortal Enemies and a Story of Kindness. His name was Thomas Beasley, a tough and callous dude who had a price upon his head for a warrant overdue. He wasn't hardly friendly, and he never smiled, it's said, and the people from all walks of life wouldn't cry if he were dead. He's cautious when he comes to town if the bounty hunter's near, 'cause that guy ain't much better from the rumors that we hear. The two of them are much alike with their lonely style of life. No one really loved them, nor did they have a wife. And then one day, upon the trail leading into town, the bounty hunter took a fall when his horse slipped on the ground. He was lying there all broken up when Thomas happened by, and there to see his mortal enemy in a fix where he could die. Well, Thomas almost left him to face his lonely fate, to die out there miles from town where no one cared of late. But something sort of happened inside that callous heart of Thomas Beasley's attitude, and here it had its start. He helped the hunter to survive and make it back to town. Thomas even came to visit him when the hunter was heeling round. Something happened between those two, and they became fast friends. They had a lot in common as their dislikes came to an end. I hear they both have mellowed now and take life with more ease, which goes to show that kindness can make enmity to cease. And can't you just picture those two hard cases having a needed friend to count on? You know, something they didn't have before, and their differences sort of disappeared into the loneliness they both shared. It's said that Thomas Beasley came around to visit the bounty hunter when he was recovering. You know, sometimes kindness in a small way can open up a door to something very big and valuable. The stories that I work with, often in poem form, speak of humor as well as serious action. And the following one is about a type of character who was sometimes viewed as a salesman, yet was sorely needed to temper the aches and pains when a doctor was not always available in the difficult times of the Old West. And so we go to Snake Oil Willie Joswell. Snake Oil Willie Joswell was the only name we knew, but his reputation and his wares was known by more than few. He sold the needed vitamins in liquid form, he claimed, and it could heal most everything, from the sick ones to the lame. We used his potent mixture on all types and kinds of wounds, even a horse cut with fence wire or dogs howling at the moon. A toothache or a bullet wound, his snake oil healed it all, and his reputation followed fast before he had his fall. But before this part, let's go and start where trouble all began, when he claimed his potent mixture had a special kind of blend. And he proved this when Lazy Joe outdrew Quick Draw Jake, after drinking Willy's snake oil and planted Jake of late. There was a rush to buy that stuff as Willy bragged and told the value of his snake oil that would turn back getting old. Well, the gunfighters and the hired guns started mixing it with drinks, not knowing what was in it. Mostly alcohol, I think. It cost $1 a bottle, and Willy was getting rich, until the guy who made the stuff got drunk on it and snitched. It seemed it had some caramel, horse liniment, and snuff, a mixture of some cheap rum and whiskey in the rough. And when those tough guys found it out, Willy's goose was cooked. They treated him most shamefully, much worse than just a crook. Willy Joswell did survive, but for here and miles around, his snake oil was no longer sold or even could be found. And there's been a lot of suffering since Willy has been gone. The territory sure misses him and his snake oil, right or wrong. And this will kind of show us what a belief system and faith can do, you know. It mostly depends upon one's thoughts, for the results come out true. And here is an interesting story about a lone gunfighter. The basis for it from an old-timer that swore there was some truth to it. It's about a young man, a loner, capable, fast, and sure of himself. And he laughingly said he was immortal. So far, his life proved it, and of course there would always be the challengers wishing to prove he could die like anyone else. And so, let us see what happens to Johnny Immortal, the tale of a gunfighter. Johnny Immortal, we called him, and he believed it too. He was the fastest gun in the West, and this tale I tell is true. No one ever put him down, though the best of them had tried. They couldn't stand the thought of him as immortal before they died. He wasn't much to look at, sort of slim and rangy like, with gray-green eyes that seemed so wise, and a rig just made for fights. His holsters were a special cut from down Laredo way, and his guns, oiled and polished, were ready for the play. Yet he was never looking for a draw or a fight of any kind. He tried his best to stay away from those with a different mind. But they always came a-looking to see if it were true, the immortal part of Johnny's name, and what a draw would do. The hired guns and the riff-raff, the outlaws and the dudes always came to challenge him, with hopes to see him lose. Yes, Johnny seemed immortal, to live 80 and more, until a band of outlaws came pounding at his door. Well, he cashiered out a bunch of them as the bullets whined and flew, but in the end he could not extend the immortal that he knew. And when finally it was over, he found to his surprise he was immortal after all, in the big range in the sky. Yes, everyone is immortal, for the soul goes on to a better life and never dies. And Johnny found this out. And finally, we come to the last of this special series on this disc. The times of the Old West will not come again, but the courage, fortitude, and the sacrifice of those who helped to build our continental nation continues on. They were much like us, you know, in many ways, facing challenges, struggling to survive the changing times, even then. And they had to improvise while taking chances, not knowing what could be up ahead awaiting them. Their honor, vision, and courage helped build the nation we are blessed to have today. And we must not forget them or let them down. Perhaps These poems and stories may help preserve the memories of that time which helped to build what we have even now. This ending poem is named Western Builders. Some say the old-time West is gone, but I don't believe it's true. It's still to be seen in things around, in the hills and mountains too. And nature with her beauty it's here for us to see, the canyons and the valleys, the coastlines and the sea. True, the dangers and discomforts of those olden times are gone, but new type challenges are here, where we have to carry on. It still takes a lot of courage to make it through the day, and our modern way of living is not an easy way. And yet we can view the present like a time of the pioneers. We indeed have more conveniences, but still faced with certain fears. And we too have to overcome the challenges of life, using tools of wisdom that we have to make things come out right. And so, in essence, we can say, we too are pioneers, building yet a nation through our work and our careers. Let us carry on the faith that others used before, and strengthen our great nation and build it even more. And for now, I bid you farewell. The Old West has returned for a short spell with its history and mystery in poem and story form. And you know, it's always my pleasure to bring joy and happiness and memories that we can carry with us into a bright new future. Indeed, may you all be blessed and find peace and rest. This is Emmett, the Malibu Poet.